Hello, everybody. Welcome to HeartMind Happy Hour, a show where we unite ancient wisdom with modern science for the HeartMind Alchemy Lab community and everyone else that will watch this and is watching this. We talk about all kinds of things: consciousness, meditation, awakening, personal growth and development, intuition. It's a big field. And my name is Holly Copeland. I'm a coach and co-founder of HeartMind Alchemy. And I couldn't be more excited today for our beautiful guest, Blaise Kennedy. Welcome, Blaise.
Thank you for having me.
I'm
excited too.
Thank you. I'm really excited because I discovered Blaise, I don't know, a few months ago now on a different podcast. And one that actually came up quite spontaneously in my feed, as YouTube will sometimes give you things to listen to. And I saw the words consciousness and awakening and just kind of, I don't know, randomly clicked on it. It wasn't me, I'll tell you that. There was divine providence, and I started listening, and I just was really touched and captivated by Blaise's process, his clarity, his openness. His spirit really touched me deeply. And I've been listening to him ever since and sharing his work. And I was so honored and thrilled when I asked if he'd come on the podcast and said yes. So really excited for the interview today. So Blaise is a spiritual teacher and somatic therapist in British Columbia, Canada. And again, as you'll hear today, he teaches something about something he calls the process, which we're going to get into in just a minute, and is in the realm of non-duality and awakening. So again, welcome, Blaise. I'm really happy to have you here. Thanks.
Again, my pleasure.
Yeah. So I'd love to start by just having you tell us a little bit about your story and how you began teaching the process and doing the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I began teaching the process, even conceptualizing the process, a long time after it started happening to me. And I got into consciousness and therapy and healing because I didn't really have, I kind of painted myself in a corner. I was really not in a good place when I was in my early 20s. And when I look back on the world that I grew up in, nobody spoke about consciousness, really. I don't think I ever saw anybody actively healing from anything. And so my culture was a culture in which you looked to build some external life and intermittently self-reflected. And that's what I did. That's just what I thought was normal. But because of the unique life challenges that I carried inside me, I was not very good at building an external life. I was very bad at it. I was very bad at being functional. And I thought there was just something wrong with me. I thought there was something implicitly wrong with me. And I spent most of my time coming up with different strategies to kind of work harder or do something different, kind of like painting over my sort of rusty ship, my interior world. And without any guidance, I didn't have any sense of being able to do something different. And where that took me actually was a drug addiction. That was that's the strategy that worked for the longest and was most effective for me. And eventually that took me to a lot of pain and suffering and feeling really stuck. And I was offered a choice by my mother. She said I could go to treatment, or that's pretty much it. I could face the consequences of my behavior, and I was in a lot of trouble. So about that time, actually, I had a friend that was into the Kabbalah, and I remember him speaking about the Kabbalah, and he also had the book Power versus Force on his shelf. And I remember I didn't understand anything about any of these things, but suddenly I just came into my mind, oh, spirituality. That's what I'm going to do. That's the thing I'm going to apply myself to. And I think in general, I just spent my life trying to figure out what's the thing that I'm going to do that's going to make me feel good. Am I going to become an astronaut? Am I an athlete? What am I going to sort of put my life energy into that's going to make me feel satisfied? And when I discovered that it was spirituality, I felt really like I'd found it. Like that was what I was going to do. So when I went to treatment for addiction, I was captivated. I was thrilled. It really hooked my intelligence. It was the first time in which, the inner experience became important, and I could apply myself to it. And so I fell in love. At the time, I had never really considered how trauma had affected my life, or how what I was doing in my life was a manifestation of something that had happened earlier. That the behavior, the life that I had now, there were root causes. And I remember being thrilled at learning that there was something that I could do to grow and change my experience that really worked, that was effective. And once I got a taste of that through addiction recovery and Alcoholics Anonymous, I just decided I wanted to see how much was possible, how much transformation and growth could I induce in myself, could I expose myself to, and that's really how it started. I'll just leave a pause in case you have a question.
Yeah, the question that arose in my mind was, there's a lot of directions that going down the spiritual path could take, right? I mean, in a sense, it all merges in one place, but that tree has a lot of branches. I'm curious which ones how you kind of ended up on the awareness, consciousness path versus some of the others.
Yeah. So when I was in recovery and in treatment and in the whole world, there's a methodology that's universal or standardized. At least it was in my world. It's a sort of Christian spin-off.
Mm-hmm.
It's essentially like a fancy version of confession and connection. The whole idea is that if you hold things inside yourself that are secret or that unacknowledged, unfelt, unshared, they will become sort of septic or toxic, and your addiction will flourish in that environment. And I'd been sitting on, a huge pile of secrets, essentially, as Adyashanti would call it, hiding inside my egoic shell, which is a funny way to put it. But I realized that there was this way in which externalizing or bringing to the surface, bringing into awareness, this sort of hidden content was the answer. That was the solution, was not to avoid things or to just make replacements, but to really go deep within inside yourself and bring things into conscious awareness. So that's kind of implicit in AA. But they don't they don't talk about consciousness directly. They don't talk about awareness directly, and they don't talk about the body. They don't talk about either of those things. They reference the past through just, I guess, thoughts and memory and without any real clear direction. So I did that for a while, and I got, I got good at it, and I was really into it. But I had a real craving for more. And sort of intuitively, I started meditating. I didn't really have a technique. I tried to do A Course in Miracles, but I didn't understand at all what the text was pointing to. So I just sat there. I sat there really, I was dedicated. I sat for half an hour twice a day. I did nothing. I didn't have a technique. And I was just thrilled that I was doing something. I was dedicated to doing something. I'd been so undisciplined in my life that the act of just sitting there was a thrill to me that I could do that. And after I'd done that for a while, I felt like I was kind of waiting around for something to happen. And I met my wife, the woman who became my wife, and she was a package deal. She brought me, obviously, my relationship with her. She brought me a whole life plan. She had really thought out what she was going to do with her life, and I hadn't thought it out so much. I was much more sort of just into meditation and consciousness at the time in my own way. And she brought me two spiritual teachers. She brought into my life two spiritual teachers. And, you know, we can reference, when we speak about the process, we can use these two paths. There's really two elements to the path of the process, which I got really involved in. And so the first is Adyashanti, who teaches awareness. And I had a book by him in which he essentially said, when you're sitting there and doing nothing, try asking, what is it that is actually aware of the experience? It's great that you're doing nothing, but take it one little step further and inquire to see, what is it that's actually living my life? And at first this seemed sort of conceptual, but I really followed through because it was really interesting, the inquiry process. And the other teacher was, his name is Thomas Hubel, and he's sort of like a somatic therapist. He wouldn't call himself that, but he is a spiritual teacher who really focuses on the ability to feel the body and relate to other people. That's his primary modality. So between these two, I had two directions. One is to learn how to hold open awareness and inquire just openly into the nature of your experience, or the self of experience. And the other is to learn how to feel, recognize everything that's going on emotionally and energetically in the body, and begin to build a relationship with that. And so the first is a meditative path, primarily focused on awakening in a pure sense. And Thomas Hubel is primarily focused on embodiment and healing. And both of these are inquiries. They're sort of a living process, which we witness, which we give our attention to, which we hopefully fall in love with. And these two things both really spoke to me. My wife bought me tickets to go see Thomas Hubel, and I remember he came to he held a sort of an introductory event at a room at UBC, the University of British Columbia. I remember when I saw him, I had this sense that this is the first person I've ever seen in my life who really knows what they're talking about. I remember just like falling so much in love with this person. He was like a rock star to me. He embodied everything that he was sparkling. He was crisp. He was dynamic. He was alive, and I just fell in love with it. Whatever he says to or he's doing, that's what I'm going to do, because it's really the only thing that I've ever seen that's real. And I would have never said I've never seen anything real before, and nevertheless I see him and I say that. So really the last what is it? I don't know how long it's been, 8 years of my life, I've been doing two things: holding open awareness, continuing to relax from the content of my experience back into the most open, most natural state of being, and to inquire into the sense of self. And the other is to feel into the body, track experiences, and learn how to relate them, learn how to feel them, establish a relationship in myself, but also how to share those with others to create connection. And that was plenty for me. That was lots of work. That created a whole lifestyle, which at first felt like something I was doing. At first it felt like I need to do these things that these people said. And after a while, it just became the way that life is. Life is those two things. Life is the experience of the self, of consciousness happening, observing itself. It's also the experience of content arising in that experience, human content like thoughts and feelings and emotions and sensations, and to be felt and processed and related to. So it went from a practice which I tried to do to something that I eventually couldn't stop it if I tried. Couldn't stop it from happening.
Really relate to that last part in your path, your beautiful path. And it had something kind of similar happen in terms of my own transformation as a teacher, going from one life as a scientist into the work that I do now. And it has that feeling about it that I'm not doing it at all. It's just happening and it's just unfolding, and I couldn't stop it if I tried. That's a really beautiful.
There's a tremendous security in that.
Mhm.
I mean, so much of my life was like, basically, if I can generate enough force of will to move, like pushing a rock up a mountain, then I will get a good life. But entropy or relaxation in that old model means kind of like death. Like if you stop for any moment, your life stops. You won't move forward. You know, there's this need to, through force of will, to move forward. But in consciousness, it's inverted. Actually, the more you relax, the more happens and changes. And it's tremendous power to realize that life actually wants, through its own force, its own power, life wants your highest potential. And letting that happen is much easier than trying to generate it yourself through your imagination, through your will, through your hopes and dreams. And allowing that force to work in life is essentially what I teach.
Yeah.
Is to get people to a state where they can experience that no matter what happens, it's life moving you towards a better version of yourself, a more open, healed, integrated, alive version of yourself, awake version of yourself. And that's something that you can trust and relax into.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And it, having been there too, you know, living for 46 years or whatever I did up until about 2 years ago when this happened, of all that trying and all that trying to make everything happen by the force of will, it's so exhausting. And of course, you see it all over the place. Most people live their lives that way.
Yeah. I look at family members that I had, and this is where I think trauma is it's really important to understand how trauma works, is
Yeah.
that you can't force your way through trauma. It doesn't matter how much you want to do better or try harder or work harder or change or whatever your plan is. Trauma doesn't respond to the force of will. It doesn't work like that. And so it's tremendously frustrating. People in my family I see who, you know, had very disempowered lives because they continued to try and push and work in this contracted way on top of the trauma that they had. And they didn't live in a world that was trauma literate. I didn't grow up in one either. And they had no concept of how to relate to the pain that they'd incurred in their past. So they really lived unfulfilled, incomplete lives. That's my lineage, is that people don't actually have access to their potential and what's best for them and their own goodness, because this way of contracting and using force, trying to move from where we are now to somewhere else, doesn't heal our trauma. In fact, it keeps us more stuck in our trauma primarily. That's not to say that, you know, there aren't things that we can do that are supportive, but in general, you know, significant trauma like I've experienced in my life, or that my family has experienced, is entrenched unless you can learn how to relate to it in an open and relaxed way. And this is like the opposite of what, you know, when we try to, if you go on Instagram and you look up motivation, and there's a bunch of quotes about what it is to be motivated, they're all going to be get up earlier, you know, do more, be more focused, concentrate more, you know, work harder, be more energetic. But if your body is holding pain, that doesn't really work. The body doesn't respond to that. So I had to learn how to do something different, and it's my tremendous. It's a gift to my gift to the world is to show that productivity and consciousness is done through allowing and relaxing, and that healing of trauma is something that's natural if we can learn how to open. If we can learn how to relax and open, our trauma isn't just sort of limitations that we're stuck with forever. It's energy that is desperate to unwind and become your potential. That everything in you that's in pain or that's stuck, incomplete, all the negativity or pain that you carry really actually wants to be let out. And unconsciously, without us really knowing it, we are actually holding all our limitations in place by what we call doing. Which is why in the 21st century, if you look at the world, you can see that we have a tremendous amount of ability to do things, and yet universally we're in pain, universally we're unsatisfied, universally we're in conflict, because we just haven't learned that yet. We haven't made it that far. So in my world, in my view of humanity, the next level is to move beyond doing, which doesn't mean that we stop doing things, but to add a level to life where we really learn and understand what being is and how to turn our attention to being, again, as a source of productivity, as something that actually affects change.
Yeah. Oh, so much of what you said resonated. And I just want to say, I want to really acknowledge how you bring consciousness and awareness and trauma together, because there are a lot of amazing consciousness awareness teachers, but not a lot that actually speak directly to people's trauma. And I think the power of your story and what you're doing is this beautiful way that you're blending the two. I have so many clients I work with, and it just seems universal that people have trauma. A lot of people have some really awful trauma.
It is literally universal. It's literally a universal phenomenon. And it's true that spirituality and trauma healing are not the same thing. So if we take those two spiritual teachers, we can generalize. We say they're two worlds. I don't know if you'd call them both spiritual, but there is the desire to wake up and there is the desire to heal or to become or to access your potential. And they're not really the same. And often they don't include each other. And I think a really powerful life is the intersection or the integration of both. And this is the wonderful, I think this is a wonderful byproduct of Eastern and Western civilization colliding, merging, that the ancient practices, which are primarily about awakening, can meet the Western mentality, which is by nature therapeutic, which is tends to be more individualist or person-centered or has a desire for human potential, that when these two actually intersect, that there's not conflict, that one doesn't win over the other, but they actually integrate for an evolution of what spirituality really is and what it is to be human, so that we don't have to leave anything aside. Because a lot of the spiritual teachings that we know of are from a very different world. And it's not to say that they're not true, but they were taught in a time when the world was not very, I would say wasn't particularly ready to heal. I don't see that as being a possibility. And the intelligent decision, if you wanted to make tremendous strides spiritually, was to kind of leave the world, live monastically, and kind of renunciate human responsibility and human connection, and just sort of sit there. So a lot of what people are talking about awakening is the experience of what it's like to sit by yourself. But no matter how far you go in that, you will still forever be relating to other people. It doesn't matter how awake you are, you will still relate to other people. There's no non-dual way out of that. You will always be in relationship as well. Just as doing and being can coincide and exist simultaneously, no relationship or this singular unified space or experience of yourself coincides with relationship. And most of the people in my life, all of the people in my life are in the world. They're in relationship. They're not sitting in caves or in monasteries. They have children and families. They have jobs. They have responsibilities. And there's no way to get out of your responsibility or your need to become the best version of yourself. Your children will demand it. Your job will demand it. Your body will crave it. we can't wish that away through some spiritual experience. In fact, it will actually, in my experience, it will put more pressure on your humanity to sort of blossom. So yeah, I've taken these two things, which are really important in my life, and I am very much interested in merging them into a single path, which will do two things. One, it will bring more relational capacity to the world. And second, it will bring to all the people that are relating, that are in the world, it will bring more of an understanding of why consciousness is relevant. Why is that not some sort of life choice? But it's actually like a fundamental state of experience, which is important to everybody, not just spiritual people or Buddhists or whatever, but is actually fundamentally important to your life as a cook or a mother or a scientist or whatever you are.
Yeah.
So an integrated life of these two things, really, they support each other. That an understanding of consciousness or the self and an understanding of trauma they benefit from each other to create a really dynamic path of awakening and evolution. And that's what I would like to see for humanity moving forward, that they're not separate anymore.
Beautiful. I do as well. I would love it if you would like to describe a little bit. So, because we've talked a lot about it, but I would love to go into it a little bit. And then if you'd like to lead a live demonstration for people who are watching so they can experience your techniques, if that feels comfortable, I would love to do that.
Right. So the best way to learn, again, as you're describing, is through experience. So we're going to learn together what awakening really means and what healing really means in an experience that we all go through together. So for the moment, we're going to separate life. We're going to cleave it apart into two things. There is the information that we perceive, and there's our awareness. Now, we are all hyper-focused on the information. That's where we do the things that we do. We tend not to notice awareness so much. We use it. Obviously, we use our awareness to look at things. And generally speaking, in the West, we describe awareness as awareness of stuff. I'm aware of whatever the information is. But there is this way in which we can actually turn our attention back onto the experience of being aware and discover something that's not information. And this is the first step that I like to, this is where I like to start people. So if you would be my guest demonstratee, we can say I like to say there's 5 channels through which we experience information. We see things, we hear things, we think things, we feel emotions, and we feel sensations. So that's our whole life. And if we go together through those channels, we can learn to shift our attention from that information to our awareness. And we can learn together how awareness is actually a place that you can go, and that it's different from the information. It has qualities that are observable, that are very powerful. So we'll do that together. If you just notice that you can see, and again, your visual field is populated with information always. And we can look about in our visual field and see things. And just like as if I was a stage musician, I'll ask you to name some things that you can see.
Okay, so I can see a lamp, and I can see a picture, and I can see a plant.
Right. Great. So as you, the listener, are looking around, you notice you can see stuff. You continually are identifying shapes and textures and colors and all of these things, and you label them, and there's this tremendous utility to that. But for now, we're going to make a shift in our focus. See things. I'm aware that I'm seeing. I can't see things without being aware. And I turn my attention away from the things that I see and towards the experience of being aware. And my question for you is, how is awareness different from the things that you see? If a lamp looks like a lamp, what does awareness look like?
It's not an object, so it doesn't have boundaries to it or edges the way a lamp does.
Yeah.
So it's open.
Yeah.
Awake.
Yeah.
And it's present.
Right. And if I ask you, who is it that's aware? What would you say to that?
Awareness is aware.
Right. Awareness is aware. So it's self-aware. It's this open space, this open, boundless space that's just there. Now, if you've never done this before, you can find all kinds of descriptions, but whatever you come upon for now, notice the further we go, it will develop. Your relationship with awareness will develop. But just notice that you're aware of something that's not a thing. It doesn't have a location. It's not, doesn't have boundaries as you described. It's just aware. So if we do the same thing with our hearing, again, we notice that we can hear sounds. We have this wonderful way of finding sounds in our environment, locking onto them, tracking them, labeling them. It helps us know. You don't have to keep wondering whose voice is speaking. You remember that it's my voice and it's coming from your speakers. And that's me clearing my throat. So as you hear all these sounds, again, we do the same shift. I'm hearing sounds. I'm aware. I can't hear sounds if there's no awareness. And I focus on the awareness itself. So if sounds feel like sounds, what does awareness feel like? What does awareness sound like?
So there's again this sense of everywhereness to it.
Yeah. Is it making noise?
No, it's silent.
So in some levels of meditation, it's really a task, a job, a doing that we do to try and empty our mind so that we can have sort of peace of mind. But could we also say that this silent awareness is inherently empty and peaceful?
Yes.
And so as a result of noticing that, you become empty and peaceful. You haven't had to stop any of the sounds from occurring. You haven't had to go to a quieter place. Awareness couldn't possibly be loud. And so long as you're connected to the experience of being aware, there's peace. And the next channel of awareness is our thoughts. We also have a mental experience, and we can just track that at any moment we can become aware of our thoughts. And again, to the listener, you just notice that you are in relationship, you are aware of your thoughts. So again, I perceive my thoughts. I'm aware of them. Again, I can't have thoughts without awareness. And I focus on the awareness itself. How is awareness different from a thought?
And again, it's just present, never leaves.
Yeah.
So right, thoughts kind of come and go, and that awareness feels like it's just in the background.
Right. That's really important. Again, I would say that thoughts are like noise or sounds or things that are moving through awareness. Awareness is just kind of like an empty space.
Mm-hmm.
And again, by noticing it, we feel. How would you describe the impact that it has on you?
It's very calming. there's also a quality of it's okay with whatever thought comes up. It actually doesn't have an opinion about those thoughts.
Right. So could we say then, since you are aware and since you are feeling that, we could say that you are okay with the thoughts?
Strangely, yes. Right.
So often we try to accept things through force of will or through our thinking, through some clever mechanism in which we say, it's okay, I accept things as they are. But by tuning into awareness, we relieve ourselves of the need to do that. It's inherent. What we hope we could be, the person that we wished we were, awareness sort of already is that. So if you were to tell me about awareness, what qualities it has, again, personify it. If you were to introduce me to awareness, what qualities would you say awareness has?
Calm, non-judgmental, open, relaxed, boundless, kind of an every-awareness. Also timeless, right? It doesn't come and go in time. Thoughts feel like they come and go in time. That's our observation, but by definition, since it's always there, it doesn't come and go in time either.
Right.
Yeah.
So those are wonderful qualities, right? If we just feel those qualities, again, as you describe them, I feel safe. I feel like I'm okay. I just feel like there's no real problem. I'm just fundamentally okay. I'm at peace. I'm relaxed. I feel open. It's lovely qualities to have. Now, again, it's you who is aware. So when we talk about ourselves, we generally reference or think about ourselves, we generally reference the information. We identify ourselves as being our thoughts and our feelings and our memories and our habits and our characteristics, and we assign value to ourselves based on those characteristics and qualities. I'm angry, I'm really good at tennis, I'm whatever it is. Imagine if the experience of being aware and all these qualities were fundamental to your identity. That when you experienced yourself, what you allowed to take up space, what you allowed to be prominent was a boundless, judgment-free, fearless, always okay, never comes and goes space. Just imagine if that was where your identity or your sense of self began to rest, how your life would be different.
Yeah.
So if I listened to heavy metal music all day, what would happen to me is I would get amped up. I would get amped up. I would start to resonate with the music and it would really charge me up. If I learned to listen to awareness, or we could say identify as awareness, if that becomes the sort of music through which I'm experiencing my life, it has the opposite effect of amping me up, creates more openness in my mind and body. It allows my whole body and mind to just be experiencing everything's okay. It's an inherent everything's okay. There is enough time and space all the time. So the first level of awakening is for this state of awareness to become present all the time and dominant. Now, we work for that, meaning we do meditation or we do practices like that until it's so obvious that we wonder how we could ever have lived without it, at which point it becomes effortless. But we do activities like this. We use our ability to do things to access the state of awareness, which is really effortless. Again, you wouldn't say that awareness is really doing anything right now, would you?
No.
So if we take a moment to think about what trauma is specifically, Trauma is the experience of not enough time and space, charge that is out of rhythm with life. It's an experience from the past that was overwhelming, that I was not able to fully experience, that lives in a kind of state of hyperarousal. And so that's the experience of trauma. Awareness, by contrast, is infinite time and space, infinite rhythm. Trauma resolution is pairing awareness, boundless space, with infinite time and space, with the charge of our trauma, of our body. And if we just right now, just take a moment, we didn't really get into the body specifically, but if we right now feel our body, we just notice whatever the energetic quality is of emotion, of whether we feel anxious or sad or tired or whatever it is. And we just shift more of our attention towards the experience of being aware. What we will notice is that the body will yield. It will relax in the presence of infinite time and space. It's quite happy to. And awareness doesn't put any pressure on the body. It doesn't put any pressure on our thoughts or mind. It doesn't ask us to be different. By accepting, by creating an open space of unlimited time and space, it invites our body to let go. And again, our body is quite happy to do that. So this is how fundamentally you can change everything about you that's not abundant or feels like you have an infinite amount of time and space or feels like it's contracted or in pain or out of rhythm. This is how you can change everything about your life without a force of will. Because the state of awareness is not a force of will. It's transcendent to that. We just don't notice this force in our life. We just don't regularly access it. But we can learn to. Everyone can learn to. Because in every moment of every day, you are aware. Your life would not be possible if this awareness was not here.
You teach about moving. It's like once we recognize the presence of awareness as primary, there's kind of this next shift of sort of learning to live in the flow of consciousness.
Right. So again, when we're not present to awareness, we feel identified more with our body. We don't rest so much into this space. And it feels like we are moving. I'm moving. I'm in motion. I'm moving myself. I'm doing things. There's a real strong sense of will and mobility and sort of I'm active. When we shift into awareness, our identity feels much more stationary because, as you say, awareness isn't coming and going. So again, if we're listening, just notice awareness isn't moving. And if you learn to rest there, you will notice that your thoughts, your feelings, your sensations, the things you see and hear, they keep moving. They don't stop moving just because you're resting in awareness. You continue to breathe. You continue to hear sounds. You continue to have thoughts. You continue to have feelings and sensations. All of that too actually is effortless, self-generating.
Right. It's like, as you say, the next thing just keeps happening.
That's right. The next thing just keeps happening. And this is it's really only possible to perceive this if we're still. And when we think of stillness, we think of like that means that I have to rigidly hold my body in place. Stillness has nothing to do with that. Stillness, again, already exists. Stillness is not something that we do. Stillness is something that we become aware of. Awareness is still. As J. Krishnamurti used to say, the seeing is the doing. if we want to be still or be at peace or be accepting or be attentive, we just access awareness. It's already doing that better than we could ever do, better than we could do through force of will. So as we become aware, we are still. We're not moving. And you can witness, again, everything keeps happening. The more you stay in the state, the more it becomes obvious. At some point, you will realize that your body and mind will continue to function without you contracting and doing anything. That your whole personality actually can autopilot. And giving up this kind of control is really just a shift in perception. It doesn't mean like you stop doing anything in particular. Again, everything just keeps going like it was before. But what you will learn is it's actually more optimal. That it moves better when you're not contracting around it. It moves better when you make space for it. So again, that's not the world that we know. And we live in a hyper-competitive world where, if you want to get the job, you got to show up at the office before everybody else or whatever. The harder you work is how you get an advantage. And that's true. There's a level at which that's true. But there's also a level at which the more you rest into awareness, the more you can let life actually do what it wants to do. And we can learn to trust that rather than like, we're not going to get left behind or not have enough. It's actually the opposite, that a life of deep relaxation into awareness is a more fluid life. It moves more naturally, more powerfully with a kind of intelligence that we over time learn to trust and let dominate our life. We see how it actually works. We see that when I'm sort of online and fluid, that everything in my life looks better, feels better, moves more naturally, and there's a kind of intelligence to it. So we learn to access that state and find that it takes us where we want to go better than we could if we tried. Mm. And that we will still observe and experience in ourselves desire. We'll still experience in ourselves frustration and all the same human things that they existed before. The only difference is that they will be continuously empowered to be as they are, because they're moving through awareness, which is not stopping them. It's like a consistent encouragement. It's like every part of your body and mind is constantly getting the message, you're okay to be as you are. That is an environment in which a human being thrives. Because we don't get that relationally, we don't know that. We don't experience that relationally when we're developing. So we don't actually have the experience of that. We internalize there's a kind of a scarcity of love and acceptance and connection, a scarcity of the good things in life, and we have to work for them. Yeah. But if you reference awareness, ask awareness right now, is that true? Is there a scarcity of acceptance? Is there a scarcity of goodness, of peace? See how awareness responds to the question like that.
Yes, exactly. It's like you're finding this whole complete being that already exists within you. That there isn't something underlying that's actually broken. There's what's underlying is actually fundamentally whole. It's fundamentally loving. It's fundamentally okay. And that you can move your life co-creating with that, unfolding in that.
Yeah. And most people, again, they're not looking for this. We're all really busy trying to do a better job of being ourselves. We're really active. We're absorbed in the experience of life in a way we're not present to awareness. We don't notice it. Usually people only come into this awareness because like me, they're suffering a lot because they suck at making their life better, or it's not working. And they go to some spiritual teacher and say, fix me, help me, teach me the trick to stop being so stuck. But as you learn, you realize, again, awareness can't be stuck. Awareness can't really be in pain. And again, it's you that's aware.
Right. So it's right there.
It's right
It's
there.
all the teachers across all have all said it's right there within you.
Yeah. But our consistent desire to change and improve, the way that we do that is by contracting into the content of our experience, the information. So we continue to leave the solution to try and fix things. It's a kind of innocent problem that we have, but the path is really about learning to relax, to change your life by relaxing your perception, by shifting your focus. And then discovering again that life is quite happy to change your life. Life is very happy to change your life. But in a way that life has its own rules. Consciousness and life have their own methods, and we have to learn about those. It's not the way that we imagine that life gets changed or improved or things get better. It's not the way that it is in the world of effort and work. It's not additive. See, in the world that we know of effort, I just keep hoping I can add things to my life so that my sort of resume, my experiential resume will look better. In consciousness, it's almost the opposite. It's actually, the consciousness really encourages parts of ourselves to come to rest. It really encourages us to come to deeper and deeper levels of letting go. And in that letting go space, we inherently feel more satisfied, more complete, more connected, more whole, and we move with more potential. So again, this relaxation, which is anathema to progress, becomes the solution to it. It becomes the way, the path. And the process is really what happens to you when you learn how to relax. The process is just my best language to describe what ensues once someone learns to relax, to shift their attention towards awareness and allow life to move naturally. A process ensues. And that's where the spiritual journey really begins, in my experience. That's where things really start to become dynamic and where things really start to change.
So beautiful in your process. I mean, what's amazing is like that this access to consciousness is so close that it can be pointed out in 10 minutes. And if people were to actually do that, it would fundamentally change their lives.
Yeah.
Right?
I have this desire, I have this image of myself going to like small towns all over America and sitting on park benches and porches and pointing to awareness and having ordinary people discover it in seconds. Because that's what happens in my work. I point to people and they go, oh, that's God. Or they say just the most amazing things about themselves and in just a moment of reorientation. And I think when we think of spirituality and we think of awakening, we think of, special people doing special things in special places with different names, funny rituals. And we think, well, that's not really for me. I'm Doug from Minnesota or whatever. I'm not that kind of a person. And yet every moment of your life is facilitated by the thing that all of those spiritual people are looking for. Every moment of your life is facilitated by the solution to your problems. And that's not a life choice. That's not something that some people gets to be true for some people, but in our history, it is something that very, very, very few people recognize.
Yeah. Right. It's absolutely available to everyone without exception.
Without exception.
For
some reason, some people become more entranced with this and more, they fall in love with it.
Right.
Some people fall really deeply in love with it. They don't maybe you could say they seek it, but more fundamentally, they fall in love with it. They just love the experience of being aware. They love that they have this. They love that they get to explore it. And those are people who really, their lives are transformed. So another way of saying this is, if you fall in love with yourself, it'll all work out.
I love what Rupert Spira says about, he points to the fact, this universality of awareness that we were just talking about, that, everybody has access to it without exception. And we all know that, right? It's not actually something we have to prove by science, but it's actually so fundamental to each of us that that without a shadow of a doubt, and so do I, that this awareness is fundamental. And he points to the fact that if a great saint, if Jesus were standing right here next to me and we were able to talk to him, he would have the same awareness too. Which is incredible, right? Because it's actually pointing to the shared divinity within all of us.
Yeah. And if you follow this road, it will take you it will take you to very extraordinary experiences, very big, because again, if you describe boundlessness, if you say boundlessness, that's something you can follow. You can relax into boundlessnesses and have very big, very wonderful, fancy experiences that really blow your socks off. Everybody can have that, again, because you all have awareness and you can't find a boundary to it. It will also take you to very ordinary experiences, because it's also true that all of this awareness is already happening in your everyday life. And I think one of the challenges that we have is, again, when we think about a better life, we think that means I move from a Toyota to like a Maserati, like I make some jump. So spiritually speaking, I need to be looking for some dazzling, fancy change in my experience, which again, when we look for that, it brings us into the content of our experience. We're looking for something. We keep turning away from the really simple reality of awareness. We keep turning away from it because we get dazzled. We look for better versions of consciousness. But if you really are in love with it, you'll stay through the experience of big, fancy experiences and ordinary experiences and come to know that that's not even really that important. At the beginning, big experiences are really helpful and can be really empowering. But ultimately, if Jesus was standing next to you, you would imagine that he's having a really fancy experience. But he'd probably tell you how ordinary it is. He'd probably tell it how like you he is. He would probably emphasize that. Most spiritual teachers who are really deep in will emphasize the ordinary quality.
Which also means that, like some consciousness state shift, like Kundalini or something that a lot of people can kind of feel, I'm going to put myself in that category too, feel drawn to, oh, I want to have this experience. It's very alluring, the, CD powers and different things that people can kind of get allured and drawn to on the spiritual path. But I think what I hear you saying is actually this awareness, consciousness is primary, is
and looking for big fancy experiences, like if that's in you, don't stop doing that necessarily. You can't stop yourself from doing that. Awareness wouldn't ask you to stop yourself from doing that. But eventually, even though even those feel really ordinary, eventually this cup and this conversation and my foot and the sunlight and the fanciest, biggest experience really feel all the same. That eventually what oneness really means is a kind of a sameness to all experiences. And the further you go into it, what you find is it's really this consistent being dazzled by good experiences and hurt or offended or upset by negative experiences. This movement between some experiences and other experiences isn't really that important. that just the simplest, most ordinary thing is what's most powerful. And that includes all kinds of big things, but that's a kind of a relaxation in which we're not so attached to experience itself. It's just an experience, and there's a kind of a sameness. But that gets worked out, generally speaking, when we go through the peaks of big experiences and ordinary experiences, and we learn that. If you learn to fall in love with awareness, you will have lots of very big experiences, because again, awareness is very big.
Mm.
And you will still have to relate to your husband or wife or sister or brother about the fact that somebody didn't, take out the garbage, and you'll have to feel the feelings that you have about that. It doesn't get you out of life. It just becomes this, I don't know how to describe it now, it integrates in with everything else that is ordinary and normal in your life.
Yeah.
But that's sort of what happens through the process of awakening.
Right. It has to be that way, right? It has to be that enlightenment is already here, because if it weren't, then it would be other, and then there would be duality. So
Yeah. For most people, that's like the idea that it's ordinary, that people don't go, wow, that's great. It's just like my experience now.
Yeah.
But the deepest freedom that I know is to not be attached to experience at all, is to not be so to not really be sort of driving at a better experience all the time. And that's a maturity that has happened to me through this process of up and down and up and down. Eventually you realize it's not so important. And actually the deepest level of relaxation is more valuable. The deepest level of acceptance than some sort of permanent fancy state. That's what I thought it would be. I thought it would be a permanent fancy state. Adyashanti had this great talk that I think about all the time. He said, if a blind man could see, at first he would say, wow, but he wouldn't say wow forever. So part of awakening is, wow, oh my gosh, that's amazing, huge, complex, beautiful. And part of it is all of that becomes really simple and ordinary. And the thing about awareness, one of the reasons awareness is so valuable is because awareness already has that attitude about life. If you reference awareness, it will hold all experiences the same. You just notice when you feel angry, it's open and peaceful. When you win the lottery, it's open and peaceful. So this maturity is really just a way of having a deeper identification with life itself, with being, that's how life feels about itself.
And where do you put the kind of progressive path, of sort of deep absorption, concentration, jhana states that can yield this, Dan Ingram like, what seems to be like so in the moment, so being that you've kind of flipped over. Do you have anything to say about that in particular?
I wouldn't emphasize that. I think there are people that are going to be drawn, there are people that are very intense that are going to be drawn to very intense practices or a very intense way of being with consciousness. But I would emphasize more, it's of more utility to me to learn actually how to relate to your humanity, to really begin to sort of underemphasize states of consciousness to some degree and bring more emphasis to the body, our emotions, our ability to be human. And deep states of absorption will occur naturally the more that we are in our body. So I'm not a big proponent of chasing experiences. I'm more a proponent that at some point you are going to need to relate to your body. You're going to need to relate to your stuff in your body and learn to relate to others. And if you really do that, you will find yourself absorbed in that process. And it's not a static state. It's not it's not consistent. It's very dynamic. It's very inconsistent. And so generally, I would say most practices in the East are that the intensity is based on a kind of absorption. That's the intensity. But I think for most of us, where we're going to get our intensity is from relationship. It's from our humanity, from actually having to be ourselves. And no matter what state you enter in consciousness, when you actually have to be in your body and be a human being, you will find it to be very unstable. You will find it to be very dynamic and very unstable. And the intensity is actually, for me, the intensity that I would promote is staying with that, is really learning to be with yourself through that. Being devoted to your body, to your humanity, your emotions, your process, in a way that that's where most of us are going to find our intensity. Because the challenges that we have, most of us experientially, are not that we're not absorbed in consciousness enough, but that we can't actually relate emotionally to each other, or we get reactive when we don't know why. And so what I'm saying is that once somebody's grounded in awareness, maybe it's your path to seek deeper and deeper states of being grounded in awareness and grounded in deeper and deeper things. That's wonderful. But for most people, applying that to your life and to your body is where you're going to get your devotional intensity from. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. And I think it's a very beautiful and wise and honest answer. I like it. Something as I've been exploring these different paths, inevitably you go down the spiritual path, rabbit hole. You kind of see the direct and the progressive, and you sort of trying to make sense of how they weave together. And, and I, very much appreciate your answer. And I think, to speak to that, maybe as an example in my own life, if you're in a challenging relationship, with a partner or, parent or a friend or whatever, and something difficult arises, like sadness will spontaneously arise, and being with that emotion in all of our humanness and staying in awareness is such a practice.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? That's a deep practice.
What I would say is actually the absorption that I'm most familiar with is natural when you are in your body. When you're not like you keep coming back to your body, but you can't leave your body anymore. That's not where we start from. Where we start from generally is being disembodied, disconnected from our body. And so if we go and we sit in long periods of time, that will create an intensity that will be very transformative. But for most people that sit for half an hour or such a time, I think when they're not sitting, when they're in their life, the most valuable thing that they can do is really deeply learn to relate to their bodies. Because as awareness grounds in the body, you will find all this instability and pain and all the suffering that we kind of hope that spirituality would get us out of. And we will have to learn to deal with that. And as we do, this awareness tends to ground down through the head, through the heart, through the belly, through the pelvis. And as it grounds down, we get a very natural absorption and stability that is permanent. It's the experience of awareness being grounded into the body is permanent. And I would for most people, I would overemphasize learning, once we have awareness, learning to relate to our bodies, because I think that's where we're going to get our most action from. We could go to some sort of Buddhist practice and they can teach us about jhanas and different states, but most of that I think is irrelevant to most people. What's relevant for most people is that that they need to come into their bodies, in their lives, in their relationships, and in their world. And the reason that we're not in our bodies in the first place is because we've left them, that we've had experiences in our lives which were intolerable, and we've left our body. So if we really want a sort of sustainable absorption or awakening, we're going to have to come back into our body. And then we will find being absorbed in the present moment is actually, that's a natural experience of awareness living permanently in the body. Does that make more sense?
It does. It does. I mean, what I hear you saying is really, this is an embodied awakening.
Yeah.
Inside out. Awesome.
Higher states of consciousness, we could think of it, in my experience, really just mean that this awareness exists in more of the body, and that the energy of the body has opened and created a field of larger, is an expanded and integrated field. The body actually works, like, in my experience, like a lens, like a telescope, you could say. And the more that the field of emotion and energy in the body is integrated into this awareness, the more it naturally holds a high state of consciousness. And the natural absorption is the sort of natural product of that. But what human beings are at beginning is that their experiences are somewhat fragmented. So as we grow up, we tend to grow developmentally through our spine vertically. Our higher functioning is where we end up. So as we go to university now, we relate mentally. We don't relate to the intelligence of our bellies or our hearts or our pelvises in our society. We go to university and we relate mentally. And that's because our civilization has been built out of people leaving their bodies and being dominant to the mind. What you will find if you return to your body, either through somatic work or through meditation, is that in your body there are fragments or pockets of memories and experiences, emotionally often very charged, that we've kind of encapsulated or forgotten. They've been stored away and they're outside of our awareness. So even when we relate mentally, we are not including these parts of ourselves. That's how our body sort of defends itself from trauma. If something's intolerable, the body will defend itself by taking awareness away from the memory. So trauma work is, again, about coming back into the body and integrating a pocket of energy with this state of awareness, state of being. So if we go into meditation not understanding that our body is going to be carrying all of these, and we're looking at higher and higher states of awareness, I think most frequently this is kind of like an avoidance. It's true that higher states will be very transformative, but for most of us, I think we're going to have to really start to bring this awareness back into our body to really sink down and be able to be with ourselves there. And as all of that starts to resolve itself, a stable state, a more stable state of presence will continuously be available, which will be deeper and will reflect higher states of consciousness. So when it's in the head, it stabilizes as the space of awareness that all of us describe, all of us, or that you describe, that our listeners can have access to. If it stabilizes in the heart, we see unity. We see a sort of the first stage of non-duality really happens when our heart opens. The heart opens because the contractions in our heart are met with awareness and they yield to that, just like in the process we were describing earlier. When it's in the belly, we yield to a larger unity, a kind of a cosmic unity. And eventually, even the whole field of creation becomes illuminated and beyond that. But what I'm suggesting is that really feeling our bodies in activity is probably the most productive thing that we can do once we have awareness. Now, if you have a big enough experience, it will force that. If you end up in a state of some kind of absorption, it will probably force that process. It happened to me.
Mm.
And I had a very big experience, and without really choosing it, I had a lot of stuff arise. More stuff than I could just possibly describe, that I could quantify. With other people, like some of the students I work with, what happens is they get to a certain level of consciousness and they realize, the body actually realizes, their whole consciousness realizes that it's actually going to have to start to bring that stuff up to go further.
Yeah.
They start to have tastes of consciousness that are so big and beautiful, and they want more. And they realize that all the emotion that they're holding in their belly, for example, I'm going to have to start to actually bring that forward.
Right.
So in my model, you could think about trauma and pain as like firewood. And higher states of consciousness are really just like a hotter room. So we use the contractions as they open, that energy fills our field, which creates a lens of consciousness that's more integrated, higher frequency, and we have access to higher states of consciousness. The larger it is, the more stable and more capacity the field has. So in my model, we burn pain or negativity or contractions as a fuel for growth. So this is because this is what's happened to me, but also as a somatic therapist, is that we know that in therapy, it's wonderful to build resource. It's wonderful to become very present, and you have to apply that. That's really where the magic is when we learn to apply those states. So again, I've probably answered this in a very long way and probably too many ways, but if we really want to access states of absorption, I believe one of the best way to do that is to come into our body and sort of process the energy that we have there, and states of higher absorption will arise out of that.
Mm. It's really what you're describing is this waking down process, is it not?
Yeah. And, that's not necessarily what I would have liked to find out. I didn't really, it's a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah.